down in the Plainwell unit down south, and then resource protection specialist out of Marquette Coordination Center and Wells Roscommon. And then I've done prevention work and fire training specialist out of the Lansing office before I took my current position as a fire supervisor. So I've quite a bit of experience and background in most of the parts of the state as we move forward. I'm gonna get my presentation up here. And I encourage questions, if you have any questions, to just put them in the chat as we're going forward. We'll have time at the end as well, but it might be just as easy with a small group to address some of them as they come up. The first thing I'm going to do is just cover a little bit of an introduction in, what does our fire program in Michigan look like. And, a lot of folks don't realize that the Michigan DNR actually does fire suppression. And we have the legal authority for wildfire protection across the state. And it's primarily, state land and private land. There's other federal agencies that have some suppression resources, i.e. the Forest Service, and then some fish and wildlife areas within a state provide their own fire suppression efforts too. But we primarily participate and do most of the suppression action across the state in partnership with these other agencies. So we have a variety of different types of pieces of equipment that we use, and I'll get into some of that. We have staff, both full-time and like permanent intermittent folks that just kind of are on call, call as needed. A big portion of our fire staff resides in the Forest Resource Division of the department, and that's where the full-time fire officers are, as well as full-time foresters and forest technicians who provide the majority of the wildfire support. But the other divisions do support as well. We have folks from fisheries and parks and recreation and wildlife and the other agency or divisions within the department that all provide help. We also are quite functioning in incident management in general. We have 4 teams within the state that handle incidents as they come up. Our expertise is, of course, in the fire realm of things, but on recent history, we are legally allowed to leave the state of Michigan to assist, like with hurricanes and tornado events out of state, as well as all risk assignments in state. And just this past year, we're quite involved with a lot of the forward field COVID-19 vaccination efforts and the temporary care facility. So it's not just fire, it's incident management in general, just trying to bring that level of organization to whatever it is the incident consists of. We also see a lot of support from our local agreements with the local fire departments. They provide a lot of initial attack resources for wildland fire. And they are the southern third of the state where we don't have as big of a footprint. They do provide a good portion of that effort down there, and we come in and assist when the incident exceeds their capacity. And then we also can tap into our agreements with, as I mentioned, with the federal agencies, but with our other state partners as well. And they can provide at any time equipment, resources, training. We work in conjunction prevention efforts. We're a member of the Great Lakes Forest Fire Compact, which is Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and then the province of Ontario and Manitoba. And the resource sharing there is very streamlined, pretty much a phone call away, and we can get anything from firefighters on the ground to air resources to drop water. So that's just kind of a little brief summary of all that we have authority to do. I'll go through some slides here just so you can get a little bit of an idea of the kind of equipment that we have. These are our primary water units. You know, smaller one that carries 150 gallons, and mid-size is 800, and the larger ones are anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500. And some of these pieces of equipment are old military surplus trucks that are converted into a water unit. And we do a lot of that work ourselves at our forest fire experiment station, which is located in Roscommon. We got a lot of pieces of specialized equipment, bulldozers, track units for getting around in marshy country, skidders with water units for off-road. And you know, this is a typical initial attack package that you would get. We do our air detection, and then you're gonna, you know, we would see a water unit and a tractor plow on the initial attack on any fire that gets called, and then it either ramps up or scales back based on what they're dealing with when they get on scene. We'll get a little bit into the danger of wildfire in Michigan. You know, I'm sure everybody has probably seen some of these Smokey Bear signs along the highways. Some are more modern, where they're electronic and computer control. We don't have to have a staff member go out and slide the signs in and out of the older versions anymore. But you know, it's just to kind of make folks aware of the current situation that surrounds them in any portion of the state. And a lot of that information is derived through, we have remote weather stations at various locations that track the weather anytime. You know, we start the stations up in the spring of the year, so anytime there's no snow on the ground, we start collecting data, and it just compiles on itself, records things such as temperature, the relative humidity, moisture that's received, wind speeds, all of those factors that play into the overall calculation. And then long term, it figures in for the drought, you know. So then as we start seeing the drought codes and indices rise, when we do get storm systems like a lightning system that comes through and we get a lot of strikes out of it, well, it's a good indicator that the potential of getting a fire start is pretty likely when we have high drought codes, you know, at the 300, 400 range. A perfect example of that this year was Minnesota, and you know, they're very comparable to Michigan when it comes to fuels and whatnot, and they've had drought codes up over 800, and they've been very, very busy with fire activity for a good portion of the year. We've had equipment over there for going on eight weeks now, supporting their fire needs. So with that weather information that's collected and the fire danger, you know, we also maintain the burn permit system. And this is just a screenshot of what that would look like. But it's used to regulate the permits for the state on a day-to-day basis, and basically indicate whether, you know, it's a safe day to burn or not, based on those weather parameters, both the accumulative and the forecasted weather that's expected to come in on any given day. If it's going to be low humidities and high winds, coupled with the indices as they've been building, you know, it's probably going to be where permits won't be issued. Permits are required anytime the ground is snow free. So you know, if there's ample snow on the ground, a permit is not required. But you know, when there isn't, and you need to get a permit, you go to the, you know, the website michigan.gov burn permits, and this will bring you, you know, it'll bring you up. There's one click prior to this, but it'll bring you up to this map, and then you just click on the individual county that you're looking to burn in, and it'll give you the specifics if a permit is issued. So for the example up there, you know, the green counties basically means that burning is open one day, all day. And if you were to click on any of those, you know, you would get a further breakdown listing the townships and what the restrictions are for that township for the day. The counties that are highlighted in orange have some of the townships have restrictions. And it may be that the township itself issues their own burn permits, not through the department. Or there may be restrictions that permits are being issued for one day after 6 p.m. Just because of the current conditions in that locale, to have the burning permissible, but not the hottest part of the day. The southern third of the state, all the counties that are highlighted in gray, the department does not regulate the burn permits for those counties. Each of those individual counties issues their own permits, whether it's the local township at the county level, the local fire department, whatever it may be. So if you were to click on any of those counties, you would get further information about contacting, either the local fire department or such and such a township, whatever it may be, that's actually issuing the permits. They do utilize our weather system to understand what the fire danger is on any given day to help them with guiding their permit issuing as well. But most of the time, for those larger metropolitan areas, the fire departments like to have a more direct control over when permits are being issued, and a lot of them have ordinances that prevent open burning in general. I'll take a breather here for a minute, and I don't know if there's any questions that have come up, Ashley, or not.
Nope, nothing yet.
Okay. So that was all to just kind of give you a little bit of a prelude going into, the wildfire risk component of the presentation. This is a, fire risk map, and there's a lot of risk assessments that get done. This one is the fire occurrence is a few years older now. But what it does is it indicates in all parts of the state what the risk for fire. The dots themselves are individual fire occurrences. So the size of the dot is a bigger fire versus a smaller fire. In the, and you look at like Crawford County around the Grayling and Mile area, the fire risk in those areas is quite elevated, and that's a good portion of that risk assessment is derived based on the fuel types that reside in some of these areas. But it doesn't just focus totally on fuel types. It talks about or takes into consideration the soil types that are there, the potential number of fire departments in that area, the response time, a whole factor of things. Some items are weighted heavier than others, so they would have more of an influence on that color shading. And for Michigan, I think fuel type is probably one of the bigger ones, but we also know that almost 90% or more of the fires in Michigan are caused by humans. So it looks into that human factor as well, where the population is. So it'll elevate some of that fire risk based on where folks are living and how often the people are causing the fire. So when you're looking at that from a planning standpoint, you start thinking, okay, well, where's the potential for the high risk in the large fires? And you can see, and this is just like 5 years worth of data on the fire occurrence. Otherwise, the whole map would just be full of red dots. You couldn't see anything. But Grayling and Notorious is very busy for big fires. I believe this one right here with the red dot was a 4-mile fire. Even you get up into Luce County, and it's not as much into the high risk area, but there's still the larger fire. This was either Duck Lake or Sleeper Lake. I forget which one, but so it kind of gives a picture of the whole state and where the risk factors are, and it kind of matches with a lot of the occurrences that we see historically taking place as well. This is just a snapshot of this year's activity, through as of today, or a few days ago. end of August actually. We had 263 fires in the state for a total of 2,300 acres. There were 63 structures that were threatened, 55 that were saved by the suppression efforts, and there were 8 that were destroyed, one of them being a resident, and 7 of them were outbuildings. And this is information that we track off of our response, and like I said, this is just DNR information. So if there's something that happened that a local fire department responded to and DNR didn't go on that, that's not reflected in this information. So the total numbers of fires is quite a bit more substantial than that. When we end of the year, when we report numbers, we do extract the fire department responses, and from a wildfire side standpoint, they're usually close to 4,000 additional responses that the local community fire departments handle as well. Most of those end up being kept at some pretty small sizes, so we never are requested just help support. And a good portion of them are in that southern portion of the state, just because of the proximity, and like I said, the DNR's footprint down there. It's not so quick and easy for us to get to a fire, so they tend to handle a lot of that response more. But it's a good indicator that the fire danger is statewide. It's not just in the northern portions of the state where the forests are thicker and there's not as much urban interface. Here's a little a pie chart on what causes the majority of our fires. And this does not change much from year to year. Debris burning is always the #1 cause. As long as I've been working, my 30+ years of fire has always been debris burning being the #1 cause. So this information is helpful when we try to structure and build our prevention programs to see, where do we need to put most of our effort in education and that type of activity to help, reduce the number of fire starts in Michigan. Lightning is a pretty big portion of it. For natural causes, some of the power line things are based on wind damage or trees coming down, which in a sense is kind of natural as well. And then this gets into, the start of the fire and whose land or property most of the fire starts occur on. And you can see that, 69% of the fires start on private land. So there's not, a lot of the fire activity isn't because of where it's starting. It's, it kind of makes good sense when people are starting 90% of it. Most of them are burning in their backyard, have a campfire or a burn barrel that, escapes from their control. So again, it just helps to paint the picture and, where the need and the activity levels reside. I don't know, Ash, if there's any questions that are popping up.
Not right now, no.
Okay. So now to the title of the presentation, the WUI, or Wildland-Urban Interface. And by definition, what that is it's the line, area, or zone where structures and other human development meet or intermingle with undeveloped wildland or vegetation fuels. So it's basically where, the woods and the people and the towns and the homes mingle together. And, sometimes it's hard to conceptualize when you're thinking that you're, in a bigger town or subdivision. But at some place along that line, the WUI exists. Some of the, when you go to some of the western states, it seems like it's a little bit more clear because there's a lot of the homes are, they're somewhat isolated or built away from a bigger metropolitan area, and they are mixed right in with the trees a lot more, but every place around has some level of a WUI. And some of it, when a lot of the risk assessment, when it's being done, they'll look at a distance or from the home. They might have a half a mile buffer or a mile buffer that they consider to be the WUI region of a community, because as there's always some outlying structures and residents, and the further out you go into the woodland, the less they are. But from a planning standpoint, and trying to reduce or be better prepared for fire response, if they have that area identified, they'll be able to know and tell a little bit better what their zone of concern is as they respond to a fire within that. And a lot of times they'll have some pre-suppression planning work in place, and it may just be, for us, we call them our pre-identified areas, we call zone dispatch areas. And that's based primarily on a volatile fuel type, which for Michigan, it's the jack pine. And most any pine can have some fuels of concern, but the jack pine is by far Michigan's the most volatile fuel. And in the spring of the year, when the moisture is out of the trees and it's going into the new growth, is when they're the driest and the most susceptible to intense fire activity. And that's why you see a lot of that risk in that grayling and some of those sandy areas where that jack pine species is known to grow. So this is a video. It's going to start, I'll run through, and there's no sound, so I'll just talk through it as it goes. But I got this from a counterpart. This is actually in a security camera video in a home, and this is in South Carolina. So I don't want to mislead anybody thinking that this was a Michigan, but there's so much similarities to this situation and what could happen here in Michigan in regards to the Wildland-Urban Interface component. And we'll let this play through, but you can see their fire started on the outside of the building, and eventually it burns through the structure. And the next slide will show the structure, what's left of it. So you can see, where that video originated, and I mean, you look at the structure itself. For one, the outside face of that structure, a good portion of it is predominantly brick, which for the most part is fire resistant. But the photo around, you can see it was basically in a subdivision. I mean, it's right there at the end of a little roundabout, and that fire was about 30 some acres, and it burned through this subdivision, and it pretty much, it burned through just everybody's backyards. You can see how the fuel is dry, so it carried through all these structures and things. But the thing is a contributing factor to that building being lost. There was another building that was burned, and I believe this was the one that was burnt right here. This picture was prior to the fire, but a component or a contributing factor to that was the subdivision itself had landscape type requirements in regards to what people could use in their flower beds, or around the base of their trees, where we see so much like tree bark and materials like that. And they were required to use it was like a pine needle type composite material. But what happened is, that fire was quick to move through all of this, fine fuel of these grasses, but it got into some of those heavier fuels that were up against the sides of those homes and up, underneath the decks or up to the decks, and which were the wood structures, and it allowed that heat concentration to remain there for a prolonged period of time, which then just started the decks and the larger fuels to burn. And with nobody being there at the home or nobody being able to respond there and take action, suppression action on it, it contributed to the loss of that structure and to the loss or damage of many others in that community. So I just thought that was a good little comparison, because I mean there's these kind of communities that exist all over the state of Michigan. So it's not just in Grayling or Crawford County or the UP where you have vast acres of wilderness and trees where wildland fire is a threat or a concern. It could be in your backyard depending on what that situation looks like. I'm going to get into a few, just a couple pictures of some of the fires that we have had in Michigan. This one is an example of them. It's a Meridian Boundary Fire, and this was up in Crawford County. And this is what you see and think of when you have lots of home losses. This is what you see on the national news, in California and out west every day with so many of their fires, because of the fuel type. So to say we're immune from these big fires in Michigan isn't the case at all either. We do get some pretty significant fires. The big concern with our fires in Michigan is we can get a big fire like this and it'll burn pretty much everything. It's going to burn within 1 day's time. Just because of our weather patterns, it's not very likely that we get fires that burn uncontained, out of control, for more than the first burn period. And when I say burn period, I mean, pretty much nightfall of that first evening, when, usually the humidities rise enough and it helps the fire activity and intensity drop. And then, we're able to take more direct attack on it and get it under control pretty well throughout the night. I don't say it always happens. The Duck Lake fire, for example, burned for a couple of days, before it was pretty much contained. But that fire burned close to 20,000 acres in that first burn period. It just got up and started making a run. And there's not much you can do to stop these in this situation. Here's a couple another shot of that fire from a different angle. You can see where it had already gone through and burned a lot of the trees, and it was starting to cool down already. This is a fire that this was in 2009. This was one that occurred in Marquette County in Upper Peninsula. And this is pretty typical of a lot of our fires that we respond to. They start, and I don't remember what the cause. Actually, I think this was a tree come down on the power line behind that residence. But whether it was the power line or a lot of the fires we see of this similar situation is somebody was doing debris burning out in their backyard, or they had a burn barrel that they burned some papers and then the ashes and embers flew out and started the fire. But this fire, our pilot spotted, pretty much in this status, or actually a little bit before, because you can see we have some suppression resources on the road already, but it's spotted across this 2-track. So this was in, like I said, up by Ishburn area in a Sands Plain zone dispatch area. So the fuels are a fuel of concern, dry sandy soil, jack pine fuels, and that ended up being over 800 acres when it was all said and done. But from the start of that fire, and this is some other shots, and you can see the WUI, that we talk about. And as we get further into the program, when we start talking a little bit about Firewise, but there's a great amount of confusion that comes in when you get a big fire. I mean, you can see the visibility with the smoke is really hard, even from an aircraft, depending on what side they're on, and they need to be kind of upwind of where that smoke is going. So, you know, a lot of the effort goes to just evacuation and keeping people safe, and not as much on the suppression end of things, trying to save a house or something if the fire is just rolling intensity wise. So that the message is, you know, to take some steps and actions as you go on your own properties before you before a fire were to occur. Here's another shot, you know, as that fire was approaching some of these homes. And I did a presentation on this particular fire, from that first slide to this fire, you know, these last couple. The pilot that took these pictures, he had a whole series of them going, and they were all time stamped. And from the first picture he took when he first spotted that fire to when it was pretty much burning like this, it was 38 minutes, you know. And I say that because it's like, if you had to leave your house and go, and you only had 38 minutes, I mean, and you weren't prepared for it, would you, you know, I mean, what would you even take? You know, would you even come close to grabbing the important things that you need, and still get what you need, and being able to actually evacuate and get out of the area? This is a photo of that fire after it was all done. That the red stuff that you can see down there on those rooftops, there was actually a tanker, you know, a large aircraft, and that was fire retardant that they came in and dropped. That saved a bunch of structures. But then again, you know, we have access to those resources, but that particular plane, it came from Minnesota, so it's not like they just take off and 5 minutes later they're on the fire to be able to do that kind of effort. But that same day, you know, the Black River Falls fire, you know, I myself was on one in Baraga County. It was called the Pinery Fire, and that was over 600 acres as well. So that was back in May. Okay, this is where I get a break from talking. Before I start this video, I'll check if there's any questions, Ashley.
Will you talk later in the presentation about how the evacuation process works if a homeowner were to end up in this situation with a fire started?
Sure, I'll just cover it right now if that works. It's kind of like I said, it's very chaotic, and it's multifaceted, where, you know, when I say we, I mean DNR, you know, our focus is on suppression effort. If we can't even take suppression action, you know, but on a large out of control fire, like some of the shots that I showed, you know, we can't work on those. We're in the same boat. We need to just pull back. So we you know, change our focus to evacuation. But we bring in law enforcement, and local fire departments assist with this as well. And, you know, early on, you know, if it looks like a fire that's got potential, you know, we'll bring in law enforcement to help with road closures, and that type of thing. And, you know, they will primarily handle and run with most of the evacuation effort, notifying residents to leave. But it's not a very streamlined process, you know, because of the confusion factor and a lot of the urgency that takes place. Because, you know, like I said, the comparison from a Michigan fire, say, to something out in Washington or Oregon or some of the western states, a lot of those fires start, you know, and they burn for weeks and months even. So there's, you know, other than some of the initial attack area, they have a little more time to plan and prepare, and they usually set up a trigger point. But our big fires in Michigan, you know, I mean, it's all happening within a couple hours. You're really burning, and you need to get a lot of that kind of stuff done. So that's where, you know, our folks, our fire officers in the field will work with their local fire departments, law enforcement, you know, emergency managers for the county, and try to just go through some simulations or pre-plan for that as much as possible. Because, you know, as I showed earlier with that fire risk map, you know, we kind of know where the areas of concern are. So there's some effort that can be made way before a fire ever starts, so that, you know, the day of a fire, in certain area, you already know that, okay, we need to do this or we need to do that to try to mitigate some of the you know, hecticness of it all. But even with the best planning, it can still get very very confusing. But that's typically how it would go is, you know, a call would be made to get evacuations underway. A liaison with law enforcement would probably be the point person working with the incident commander of the fire. And, you know, so simultaneously, there's kind of like two different efforts sometimes going on at the same time. One is, you know, law enforcement component with the evacuation, road closures, and then the other is suppression efforts of taking action on the actual fire.
Thanks. That's all we have right now.
Okay. So this is a video taken by one of my pilots. I believe this was, well, I think there's a title on it, the 772-mile fire. This was up in Grayling, Crawford County area last year. And this just gives you a little perspective of what they see. And, you know, from the, you know, we rely on our aircraft a lot for the intelligence that they can provide by having that bigger picture. Because the suppression resources on the ground, they only see one little piece of the fire, and that's if they're lucky, if it's not so smoky that they can't hardly even see right immediately where they're at. So when it comes to structures threatened and things of that nature, the planes are telling us what's out in front of the fire and the directions that it's traveling, and allows, you know, us to tailor our suppression efforts a little bit more, whether they can take action. I'll put this going. There is some sound to it, but it's mostly aircraft noise. So with that video, you know, it's just to kind of give everybody a little bit of an idea of what an actual fire looks like from the air, as well as some of the areas of concern and consideration going into it. You could see the homes that were intermixed in the fuels out in front. You know, if you noticed the direction the smoke was traveling, you know, so put those homes in the fire's path. So, you know, to go back to that evacuation discussion earlier, you know, a lot of times when you got heavy smoke, you know, unless you're really intimate and familiar with that area, you might not even know some of those structures are up in interior on some of those areas. You see how some of the driveways were, you know, somewhat hidden and sheltered by the trees. So that's kind of, you know, just a good picture of what it is that on a larger fire that is there to be dealt with. Just a little bit on the aircraft that you've seen in that, you know, that footage, you know, as our lead pilot, detection pilot. When I say pilot, we don't have suppression aircraft within the DNR. We have detection aircraft where they're flying patrols looking for a fire on high fire days to try to locate them and where we can respond to them before they get to be a large problematic fire. But those aircraft are brought into the state with the Forest Service, and through agreements, you know, we have access to pulling them in on a fire. You saw 3 different types of aircraft in there. You know, they're 2 helicopters. You've seen the one with the bucket, that would be like a Type 3 ship. And then that bigger one with the orange one, you didn't see the bucket hanging from it. It kind of was dropping water. That was a Type 1, and that would actually go and that there was like a long hose hanging off the bottom of that where it would hover over the water and just like suck up water out of a lake and fill a tank on the ship, and then it would drop, you know, like kind of like bomb doors that open up to drop that water, and they can control those drops, you know, have, you know, 100 gallons go at a time, so that when they were trying to run a big long piece of line, you know, they control. It's not like all of it just washes out at one time. And then those other smaller aircraft, those are called fire bosses, and those actually fly down and they're skimming along the top of the lake, filling up their pontoons, you know, that they land on. And they're very effective in you know, 2 or 3 or 4 at a time, because they can just kind of come in and run stringer trails of drops. So they bring those in, as most people are probably familiar with. Michigan has a lot of water, so those kind of small scooping aircraft are very usable here, because they don't have to go very far to find a lake or something that they can touch down on and scoop up. So we used them this past spring, probably on about 5 or 6 different fires in the state as well. So that's some of the stuff that we have available to us through our mutual aid agreements. So now we'll kind of get into the tail end of the presentation. You know, I mean, this is where, as homeowners and community folks, you can do the pre-planning or the preparing, you know, before the fire starts. And this is just, you know, some examples of different documents that are out there. But wildfire preparedness, or, you know, community wildfire preparedness, you know, we call them, you know, it's a CWPP, you know, for community wildfire preparedness plan. You know, this particular document is just a leader's guide. You know, there's another version that's for like fire departments, but the intent of it is try to develop a Firewise community, and you know, we'll talk about Firewise a little bit, but this is to go broad scale, you know, like for a community. So if you have a subdivision or a homeowners association or something of that nature, you know, it's to get everybody involved in practicing, you know, techniques that are going to help. Because a lot of times, I mean, if you have one home that takes, you know, all kinds of precautions, but the proximity of that home to other homes, or trees or woods or whatever, is close enough. The efforts of that one may not be enough to prevent it from burning in a big fire, because the adjacent buildings or structures or homes or whatever didn't take some similar precautions, and they catch fire, and then just through convection and radiant heat from one building, a fire can spread to another. So there's a lot of programs out there, and I don't know where everybody's from across the state, but if it's something that interests you and you want to see something build, there's opportunities to try to go down that. And we give grants, and we've given grants for the communities to write plans. Our grants that we issue have been on a county level. So for example, Crawford County, they know they got a huge wildfire potential in their county. They wrote a plan. In that writing of that plan, they identify their hazards, what are their biggest concerns, narrow roads, lack of good signing for some of these 2-track roads, things like that. So they identify those hazards, and then it allows them to apply for mitigation monies to help fund some of that project work. So the fire department chiefs have been going out. They'll do a home assessment or an inspection on individual homes and give recommendations to homeowners what they can do to take steps on their own to help prevent, not prevent the fire, but prevent their home, prepare their home to be a little bit better to withstand a fire on their own. Because ultimately that's what ends up happening, is if your home survives or not, a lot of times it's not so much the fire, but how well your home was in a position to do so. Firewise is the program, the community, wildfire preparedness. That's an overall program, but as individual homeowners, Firewise is the program to pay attention to. And you can just see some of the examples, the picture on the top, you got needles and leaf litter on a roof. That fire could still be a half a mile away from this structure, but if you get embers or sparks that are in that convection column of smoke and drop out, they could land in this stuff and catch that structure on fire, and there might not be a person or a firefighter anywhere around there to put it out. A lot of times if somebody happened to be standing there, they could actually extinguish it, but being that it's a half mile out front of the main fire front, their focus is somewhere else at that time. But it's not at all uncommon to have spot fires that far out in front. And then you take that bottom picture and you just have a nice green belt area between your home and the fire. Firewise, it talks about the different areas around your home. The further away you go from your structure, the more you can allow fuel loading type things, but as you get closer, you should have it where it's less. And it talks about that, and I think actually I'll put a bunch of reference materials in the chat when we're done here. Here's just another picture of some of that spacing recommendations. A big recommendation is tree canopy and tree species, because there's some species are less flammable. You take a hard maple, for example, it's not gonna catch and burn and crown a fire like a pine, or a conifer type would. So to think about some of that when you're doing your landscaping. You'll hear him talk about the 3 zones. The zone 1 is being the structure zone, for the ignition. That's where houses, if fire gets into there, that's where it will have a greater impact on the structure. The zone 2 being the fire break, trying to have it where the fire would drop in intensity as it's entering in. And then zone 3 is just another area where you would maybe have more thinning of the fuels. Here's some more reference material. So, I'm not going to get in all of this. There's just a ton of it out there that helps give some good guidance on it. couple more things, some real simple steps, you know, to take. And like I said, this is where, as individual homeowners and residents and groups and organizations, this is where the difference can be made, because most of this stuff doesn't take a lot of effort to pull off either. And you know, when a big fire does go through, there's just not enough suppression resources to be able to cover all of the homes that are intermingled, and a lot of them catch fire and burn just because there's not somebody that is physically able to be there, even though it's a very low intensity fire. Here's a couple more examples. You know, wood stacked right up close to a resident. Sparks and embers can blow into those wood piles and catch on fire, and you know, and that building would catch fire, and then just the debris in your rain gutters and roofs. This is a picture of a cabin that I took. This was on a fire I was on in Wisconsin, the St. Germain fire. That was, I forget, I think 7,000 acres. But just a simple little thing, you know, it's not a full-time resident, but you can see it in the picture is not the greatest, but you can see that they have vinyl siding. The brown is the vinyl siding on the top portion of it, but the dark green on the bottom is like your metal roof material that you would find on a roof. So they just put that all around the bottom of their structure. So if a fire did burn, you know, through the grass or leaves or whatever and got up to the building itself is that much more likely to survive a low intensity fire, just because of the you know, the type of material used, that it's just not, metal's not going to sustain the fire. You know, it doesn't mean if embers blew up into the eaves or something, it might have a problem, but even then, you know, there's steps that you can take to mitigate that. Here's another example from that same fire. You know, and this was a fast, hot, intense fire, but you can see the green belt around that house, and the fire skirted around it. And, you know, the corner of this garage was a little bit singed, but it's still very salvageable as it was intended to be. So this picture is actually a picture from Michigan. There was 3 structures lost in this fire. This was down along the Lake Michigan shoreline over, I forget if it was in Ottawa County or somewhere over that direction, South Haven, Grand Haven area. And what started as a dune grass fire from some fireworks along the lake shore, and it just, you know, for anybody that hasn't seen dune grass, it's a very high intensity flammable fuel, and it just raced up, and you could see there's some conifer types, but it just raced up out of the beach area and into the tree component, you know, and burned down three structures. And this was a few years ago. This structure here was on that same fire in Wisconsin that I was on. I took this picture. You know, this is very common around Michigan to see homes and camps on the lakes, and you think, you know, you don't think with water all around you that you would have to worry about a woods fire or a wildfire, but it does happen. And the story behind this one, I talked to the homeowner, and it was a young couple, and they both were firefighters, and they were working on this fire in a different portion of it on the day of. And when they got back, this is what was left of their home as they were working on this fire in a whole different region. And they hadn't even actually had a chance to move into this home. They had just bought it and closed on it like a week before, so they never even were totally moved into it. But this is a very common site for a lot of our structure loss in Michigan. This was a photo I had when I was in the Upper Peninsula. You know, and granted, it's an older farm area, but you can see, you know, the bottom picture shows, you know, the dry grass and the fuel right up to the building. You know, in this particular building didn't burn because there was some concrete block around the base of it, but it was a very low intensity fire. You know, it was spreading, and there was open flame when we got there, but not like it was getting up into the eaves. But the building in the background, you know, had that same fuel loading right up to it. Well, that was a a wooden structure building, a garage, another garage, I believe. And that one was a loss. And the house, which isn't in the picture, also had some substantial burning on the siding. It didn't burn the house down, but it caused some damage on the outside. Just because, you know, of the dry fuel right up to the lot or to the structure. And we see that a lot. A lot of the structures are there. And had a green belt or some fuel mitigation work around it, both of those buildings would have been still standing, you know, or that one would still be standing, even if nobody was home when that fire crept around through that area. The last part of all of this is, you know, there's a federal program. It's called Ready, Set, Go. It's, you know, managed by the International Association of Fire Chiefs. It's just to help local fire departments work with residents they serve, and basically what it means, you know, and it kind of sums this whole presentation up. Be ready, you know, create, maintain the defensible space, and harden your home. You'll hear them talk about hardening your home, and that basically means trying to get your home in a position where it can survive on its own. One of the things, you know, a lot of times when I've been on Western Fire and we have to go into a community and do a home assessment, you know, we go in and inspect the homes, and, you know, we're out in front of the fire quite a ways, so it hasn't got there yet. But what we're looking at is how survivable is that home on its own without any interference, you know, without any action. How survivable is that home with a little bit of mitigation work, which might mean going in and you know, a few firefighters, a couple hours to go and cut some brush around it, or throw some wood piles away from the house that have been, you know, piled up right next to the structure and scatter them. Or is that home just too much of a risk and not worth, and I don't say worth in regards, because everybody's home is their home, but is it too much of a commitment to try to save that one home versus putting that effort into saving 15 other homes, you know, the same amount, because there's just brush all over, the roof's covered in pine needles, you know, the gutters and leaves are up under the decks. You can't hardly even drive a fire truck down the road because there's so much brush. The road would need to be widened and those type of things. And it actually, you know, will kind of rank out homes that way. Ones that, you know, they don't have to do anything to, ones that they can go in and hit them real quick and be done and move on to the next one. And then there's ones that they just, you know, it's just too far beyond what they can do in amount of time given. And then the last part of it is, you know, get set, you know, prepare your home and the family like we talked about, you know, and have a plan of where you're going to go, you know, and this is a big thing, you know, I mean, a lot of people get evacuated, and usually most emergency services are good for setting up evacuation centers. And for the most part in Michigan, ours don't last for more than a day or two at the most. But if you had to go long-term, you know, you see this a lot of times with the hurricanes and floods down south, you know, where can you go and stay for a while if you have to, and then just go. Don't wait, you know, get out when you're in good time to get out before you get trapped in there and become, you know, a problem for the responders as they're trying to do things, and suppress the fire. But if they have to be worrying about trying to get people out, then that takes away from what their main purpose. And that's all I have for a formal presentation.
Very good, thank you. While I wait to see if any questions come in, I'm going to put the Google form in the chat for ISA and SAF continuing education credits. So you'll have access to that, and the resources that Dan mentioned I'll include in an email that I send out to everybody who had RSVP'd for this talk as attachments, and a couple links to some resources as well. end the recording. So I'll give a couple more minutes for any questions. Otherwise, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Feel free to reach out if things come up afterwards, any thoughts or questions about the topic tonight. We're happy to send some resources your way or get you in touch with somebody.
And I'd just like to say thanks too for allowing me to speak, and I apologize for a few times when I slipped up and called Ashley Ash, but in case you haven't noticed, we have the same last name, and that's been her nickname since she's been growing up. So
I will end the